You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Scope management is about drawing clear boundaries and making sure every piece of work directly supports project benefits. The purpose of this toolkit is to provide a structured way to define what is included, what is excluded, and how acceptance will be proven. When applied well, it reduces disputes, shortens sign-off cycles, and minimizes rework. In predictive environments, the scope baseline anchors clarity, while in agile contexts, the product backlog provides a dynamic but disciplined scope home. Regardless of delivery mode, scope must remain tied to benefits and constraints. On the exam, stems that describe ambiguous deliverables, surprise additions, or missed acceptance criteria are testing whether scope was managed deliberately and transparently. The outcomes of effective scope management include fewer disputes, faster approvals, and increased stakeholder trust. When stakeholders know exactly what will be delivered and how acceptance will be confirmed, confidence rises. Teams are less likely to waste effort on work that looks impressive but adds no value. By defining boundaries clearly, projects avoid the slow erosion caused by incremental, nice-to-have additions. PMI emphasizes that clarity up front pays dividends later in smoother delivery and more predictable value realization. On the exam, distractors that suggest just deliver everything stakeholders mention are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize structured boundaries and disciplined acceptance. Scope management applies across predictive, agile, and hybrid contexts with tailoring. Predictive projects often rely on formal documents like the scope statement, work breakdown structure (WBS), and scope baseline. Agile projects rely on a transparent product backlog refined regularly. Hybrid projects may use a backlog but map it to a formal baseline for governance. The toolkit works across all approaches by emphasizing the same principles. Define clearly, decompose work logically, tie deliverables to benefits, and confirm acceptance visibly. On the exam, stems that confuse flexibility with no discipline are misleading. Correct answers emphasize tailoring scope management without abandoning structure. Defining scope begins with elicitation and clarification. Techniques like workshops, interviews, prototypes, and story mapping help stakeholders articulate what they truly need. Workshops bring groups together to surface differences and align priorities. Interviews provide depth with individuals who have unique insights. Prototypes and models allow abstract requirements to become concrete, making misunderstandings visible. Story mapping is especially useful in agile environments to visualize user journeys. PMI emphasizes resolving terminology early to avoid later disputes. For example, if one group defines report as a static PDF while another assumes a live dashboard, conflict is inevitable. A shared glossary becomes part of the artifact set. Exclusions and constraints are as important as inclusions. Many scope disputes arise not from what was promised but from what was assumed. By capturing exclusions explicitly, for example, mobile app support is not part of this release, the project manager avoids silent expectations. Constraints such as must comply with accessibility standards or, quote, delivery limited to existing infrastructure shape scope boundaries realistically. Aligning these definitions with stakeholder value and compliance ensures that scope reflects both organizational priorities and external obligations. On the exam, stems about quote, surprise scope requests highlight missing exclusions or constraints. Correct answers emphasize documenting them clearly from the start. Work breakdown structures are central to predictive scope management. AWBS is a deliverable-oriented decomposition of the project into smaller components. Each work package is defined in a WBS dictionary, which explains scope, boundaries, and acceptance proof. The goal is right-sized work packages, large enough to be meaningful but small enough to manage and measure. Interfaces and ownership must be visible, so no work is orphaned. Linking WBS elements to schedule and cost planning ensures integration across plans. On the exam, distractors that describe task-oriented WBS with no deliverables are misleading. Correct answers emphasize deliverable orientation and acceptance linkage. Right-sizing work packages avoids extremes. Work that is too large becomes vague and unmanageable, while work that is too small leads to micromanagement and excessive overhead. PMI stresses that each work package should be scoped clearly enough that acceptance can be confirmed objectively. Ownership must also be defined, ensuring accountability. Orphan work tasks, not tied to deliverables, represents wasted effort. By linking the WBS to schedule activities and cost accounts, the project manager ensures coherence across baselines. On the exam, stems describing, quote, deliverables with no owner or acceptance criteria highlight gaps in decomposition. Correct answers emphasize clarity and accountability at the work package level. Interfaces are another key aspect of WBS planning. Projects often involve multiple teams or vendors, and integration points can become sources of risk. A WBS dictionary should note not only what is included, but also how deliverables connect to others. For example, a software module might require an interface with a vendor API. Making this explicit prevents later disputes about who owns the integration. PMI emphasizes that scope clarity includes connections, not just isolated outputs. On the exam, distractors that ignore interfaces are incomplete. Correct answers emphasize that scope decomposition must capture deliverables and their integration points. Agile projects use a backlog rather than a WBS, but discipline remains critical. Epics are decomposed into features, which are further refined into user stories. Prioritization is based on value and risk, ensuring the highest impact work is delivered first. Slice size is refined over time so that stories become actionable. A definition of ready ensures that items entering an iteration are clear, feasible, and testable. Transparency is essential. The backlog must be ordered and visible to all stakeholders. On the exam, distractors that suggest flexible backlog equals no prioritization are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize ordered, transparent, and value-driven backlogs. Backlog management also requires continuous alignment to benefits. Each story or feature should trace to a benefit or stakeholder outcome. Without this, backlogs can fill with items that consume capacity but deliver little value. Acceptance evidence must be tied to each backlog item, whether in the form of test cases, demo steps, or documented sign-offs. PMI emphasizes that a backlog is not a wish list but a disciplined scope artifact. On the exam, stems about unprioritized or bloated backlogs highlight poor management. Correct answers emphasize alignment, ordering, and evidence of acceptance for every item. The definition of ready plays a key role in backlog discipline. A backlog item is ready when it is clear, testable, and feasible within the team's capacity. Teams that skip this often face mid-iteration surprises, with stories proving ambiguous or too large to complete. By enforcing a definition of ready, project managers ensure predictable delivery and higher quality. Similarly, backlog refinement sessions keep items actionable and aligned with value. On the exam, distractors that suggest accept unclear items into a sprint are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize readiness criteria and backlog refinement discipline. Acceptance criteria bring scope clarity into focus. Acceptance criteria, often abbreviated AC, are testable conditions that prove whether a deliverable meets requirements. Good acceptance criteria include both examples and non-examples to clarify boundaries. For instance, an AC for a login feature might specify user can log in with valid credentials and system denies access with incorrect password. Non-examples prevent misinterpretation. PMI emphasizes that AC must be clear, measurable, and visible. On the exam, distractors that describe vague AC, such as easy to use, are traps. Correct answers emphasize testable, example-based AC. Acceptance criteria connect directly to the definition of done. The definition of done, often shortened to DoD, is a shared agreement about what it means for work to be complete. It includes compliance requirements, non-functional requirements such as performance or security, and evidence of acceptance. Predictive projects use sign-offs and test results. Agile projects often rely on demos or automated tests. The DoD prevents disputes about whether a deliverable is finished. On the exam, distractors that suggest, quote, done means developer says it's complete are wrong. Correct answers emphasize visible, testable, and agreed criteria for completion. Acceptance evidence must also be planned. For some deliverables, evidence may be test logs. For others, it may be a signed approval form or a demo recording. The key is deciding up front what proof will be collected and publishing that expectation. Evidence provides the audit trail for compliance and supports lessons learned later. PMI emphasizes that acceptance must be documented, not assumed. On the exam, stems describing quote quotes disputes because no evidence of acceptance highlight this gap. Correct answers emphasize visible, agreed evidence of acceptance as part of scope discipline. Finally, acceptance criteria and the definition of done must be published where everyone can see them. Hidden criteria cause disputes and rework. By making them part of the shared artifact scope baseline, backlog, or team charter, everyone knows the rules of completion. Transparency strengthens trust and prevents scope debates late in the project. On the exam, distractors that imply, quote, criteria kept private by one group are incorrect. Correct answers emphasize shared, visible, and agreed acceptance definitions as the foundation of disciplined scope management. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Traceability is a central tool in disciplined scope management. A requirements traceability matrix, often abbreviated RTM, links each requirement to its design element, associated test case, evidence of completion, and final acceptance. This chain prevents scope gaps where requirements are forgotten, and gold plating, where extras are added without authorization. A well-maintained RTM also simplifies audits by showing clear coverage from requirement to evidence. PMI emphasizes that the RTM should remain lightweight but living. It must be kept current as changes occur. On the exam, stems that describe requirement delivered with no test evidence point to weak traceability. Correct answers emphasize linking requirements visibly to design, testing, and acceptance. The RTM must also be kept agile. Copying and pasting information across systems creates drift, where multiple versions diverge. Instead, the RTM should link to other artifacts, such as backlogs, test repositories, or change logs, without duplicating data. Each row in the RTM evolves as changes occur. When a scope item changes, its corresponding RTM row must be updated immediately to maintain accuracy. PMI stresses that RTM discipline is not about bureaucracy, but about protecting integrity and avoiding missed requirements. On the exam, distractors that suggest update RTM after project closes are traps. Correct answers emphasize keeping RTM live and updated continuously. Another use of the RTM is to tie requirements to benefits. Each requirement should link not only to deliverables and tests, but also to the value it supports. This ensures that teams focus on requirements that matter most to organizational strategy. Orphan requirements, those without benefit linkage, should be challenged. PMI highlights that tying scope to benefits protects against wasted effort and ensures that project outputs enable real outcomes. On the exam, stems about features delivered but no value realized emphasize this risk. Correct answers highlight connecting requirements through traceability to benefits and owners, ensuring scope integrity and value alignment. Scope management also requires distinguishing between validation and control. Validation refers to the formal acceptance of completed deliverables. This step proves that the work was done and meets acceptance criteria. Validation creates closure for work packages or backlog items. Control, on the other hand, refers to managing variance and making changes to scope as needed. Control is about preventing drift and handling new requests. Agile mirrors this distinction. Sprint reviews validate completed work, while backlog refinement applies scope control policies. PMI emphasizes that both processes are necessary. On the exam, distractors that treat validation and control as interchangeable are incorrect. Recording outcomes of validation and control visibly strengthens accountability. When a deliverable is validated, acceptance evidence is stored and traceable. When scope control decisions are made, they are logged in change records, showing rationale and impacts. This transparency avoids disputes and strengthens trust. Agile teams often update backlog items with acceptance notes, while predictive teams may use sign-off sheets or acceptance logs. In either case, visibility ensures stakeholders know what has been accepted and what has changed. On the exam, distractors that imply acceptance is informal or scope changes unrecorded highlight weak scope governance. Correct answers emphasize visibility and record-keeping. Guarding against scope creep is another essential discipline. Scope creep occurs when changes are accepted informally, often as small tweaks, without proper impact analysis. PMI stresses that even minor changes can disrupt cost, schedule, or quality if aggregated. The project manager uses impact analysis before accepting any change, no matter how small. Scope policies must be published so stakeholders know the proper path for requests. On the exam, distractors that suggest accept changes to keep goodwill are wrong. Correct answers emphasize performing analysis first, then routing through the approved change path before updating artifacts. Preventing scope creep also requires publishing thresholds and saying no with options. Instead of rejecting a request outright, project managers present alternatives. Defer to backlog, phase into later releases, or adjust scope with trade-offs. Reinforcing ground rules about scope change keeps expectations realistic. Stealth scope, when changes creep in via side channels like email or hallway conversations, must be addressed directly. PMI emphasizes that reinforcing the change path builds stakeholder confidence. On the exam, stems about unapproved changes delivered quietly. Test this. Correct answers emphasize transparent impact analysis, proper approval, and updated artifacts. Regular reaffirmation of benefits and constraints is another defense against creep. By reminding stakeholders of project benefits, cost caps, and schedule deadlines, project managers make it clear why scope cannot grow unchecked. Alignment with strategy provides a strong rationale for disciplined scope management. PMI emphasizes that benefits alignment transforms no into not aligned. On the exam, distractors that ignore benefits or constraints when making scope decisions are incomplete. Correct answers emphasize reaffirming strategic benefits and project constraints as the basis for rejecting or adjusting scope requests. Let's consider a scenario. A stakeholder emails a quick tweak request after sign-off, and development has already begun. Options include approving it immediately to keep goodwill, adding it to the backlog without analysis, conducting impact analysis and deciding via policy before updating artifacts, or rebaselining first. The best choice is structured discipline. Analyze impacts, decide via the appropriate policy or board, update the baseline or backlog, revise the requirements traceability matrix, and communicate the decision. PMI emphasizes that goodwill must not override governance. On the exam, distractors that jump to approval or rebaseline first are wrong. Correct answers emphasize impact analysis and governance. In regulated contexts, scope changes also demand compliance evidence. Regulators often require documentation showing why a change was accepted, who approved it, and how it affects compliance obligations. Without this, even compliant deliverables may be rejected during audits. Formal change logs, traceability updates, and acceptance evidence provide the audit trail. PMI highlights that in regulated projects, scope discipline is not optional. It is enforced externally. On the exam, stems describing, quote, "Itwaye audit failed due to undocumented change," point to this requirement. Correct answers emphasize updating compliance documentation alongside scope artifacts. Common pitfalls in scope management include vague acceptance criteria, missing exclusions, weak traceability, and side-channel scope agreements. Vague AC leads to disputes, as stakeholders disagree on whether deliverables are acceptable. Missing exclusions create false expectations about what was included. Weak traceability allows requirements to slip through gaps or encourages unnecessary extras. Side-channel scope agreements undermine governance and create mistrust. PMI emphasizes that these pitfalls erode confidence and increase rework. On the exam, distractors often embody these pitfalls. Correct answers emphasize clear AC, exclusions, traceability, and formal change paths. The quick playbook for scope management starts with clarifying terms and shared definitions. Next, decompose work into right-sized deliverables, whether through a WBS or backlog refinement. Write testable acceptance criteria and publish a shared definition of done. Maintain a live requirements traceability matrix to link requirements, tests, evidence, and benefits. Analyze before accepting changes and enforce the agreed change path visibly. Keep one authoritative home for scope, the baseline in predictive or the backlog in agile, and link it to benefits and constraints. On the exam, correct answers echo this playbook. Disciplined scope management prevents disputes, avoids rework, and ensures value delivery. Another best practice is validating formally and controlling scope with policy. Validation means securing formal acceptance of completed work, while control means managing variances and changes with discipline. Both are necessary to sustain stakeholder trust. Artifacts must be updated every time scope changes are approved, ensuring a clean audit trail. Benefits and constraints should be revisited frequently to remind stakeholders why discipline matters. On the exam, distractors that suggest accepting changes informally or declaring work done without evidence highlight weak governance. Correct answers emphasize disciplined validation and control, supported by policy and artifacts. In summary, the Scope Management Toolkit emphasizes boundaries, decomposition, acceptance criteria, and discipline in handling change. Tools like WBS, backlog refinement, AC, definition of done, and RTM provide structure. Practices like impact analysis, validation versus control, and benefits alignment protect against scope creep. Exam pitfalls include vague AC, missing exclusions, weak traceability, and side-channel scope. Correct answers highlight structure, transparency, and disciplined governance. PMI's philosophy is simple. Projects succeed not by doing more, but by delivering the right scope, aligned to benefits, with visible acceptance and traceability. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.